So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started on it because I've been kind
Okay.
of anxious to get things going. I'm Light and Shadow Healer. I am a Reiki master. I've been a Reiki master for about 4 years. I also been training under Cosmic Nuaje, getting trained in intercession and hoodoo, and so I do offer Reiki treatments and also divination, all that good stuff. But today I really wanted to talk about the aura and why we really want to maintain and take care of it, and how not taking care of your aura can impact you. So, one of the first ways in which um, our aura affects us is our intuition. It has a direct effect on your intuition, not how strong it is necessarily, but overall in terms of skill level. But when so our auras, the way that it has a natural flow to it, so it'll flow out from the crown of your head down to your feet. And it kind of serves as this kind of protective, energetic bubble for your vital energy that's contained within it. And most of us are aware that, different people may have different colored auras. And also, on top of the different colors, there can be you can see even the different colors of, like, almost like a mood ring, depending on the mood of the person, any sort of attachments there might be on there, stuff like that. But the way that it can affect your intuition is because it has a natural flow to it. When we become stressed out, if we become sick, um, it can begin to flow in an erratic motion. And I've also noticed that if you're nauseous, it can be just flowing in the complete opposite direction. And one of the ways where you might notice this, if you're not having sort of a physical uh, if you're not having a physical reaction to this manifestation of it, is that you begin to sort of second guess every decision you're making. You begin to um, not be able to trust someone who likes using tarot sense. Um, you may pull some cards, but you might feel instinctively that maybe you pulled the wrong ones. Or another great example of that, when it comes to divination, is when someone is super emotionally charged. Usually the advice there is to get someone else to do it, because you may kind of override the answers that you're getting. And one of the reasons that's happening is because the flow of the aura has been knocked off course. And so uh, you really want to be kind of cognizant of when these things happen. It can just, return to normal as we kind of ground your energy, and it'll kind of resume its natural flow there, or really sweeping through the aura with your hands repeatedly. Taking a spiritual bath also can kind of help reset that, and also just really addressing the reason why it's knocked off course. So whether that is stress, reducing the stress, are you getting sick, dealing with that. So really getting to the root cause of why it's manifesting in that sense, in that way. So another way that you'll begin to see how your aura impacts you and why you want to maintain the health of it is that it also will affect your sleep. Especially if you have any sort of tears or holes in the aura. So, like I mentioned earlier, there is a flow that the aura will have naturally, again, from the top going down. But it also, as I said before, serves as like a protective bubble, and that protective bubble can kind of tear a little bit, or there can be holes there. And again, that can be due to extreme stress. That could be if you got into a fight with somebody. Perhaps psychic attack is really what it is. Like, so if you have someone who is very envious of you or can't stand you, and or someone who's like kind of a psychic vampire, you kind of feel depleted by being around them. A lot of the times, small tears or holes begin to appear there. Another way that this can happen is through injury, or even surgery. And the aura can heal itself over time. But if you're someone who's always in a kind of high stress environment, like high stress work, like where you work is very high stress, that can just wear on it day in and day out. And even as tears close up on their own, they begin to kind of open up again if there isn't some sort of protective barrier that you're implementing there. So one of the first signs of this is that it can become very hard to stay asleep. You may wake up, maybe even at the same time of night. That also depends on if there's something going on with you physically. Um, Illness is also a great, or not great, but another key indicator in terms of there being tears in the aura. So if you're, say, dealing with issues with your liver, or even if you have a cold, there's usually a hole or a tear that's begun to form as the integrity of the aura has kind of weakened. And you'll find that, either you easily wake up and then it's hard to go back to sleep, or it's hard to go down to sleep in the first place. And until that issue is resolved, it's going to be really hard to get a full night's rest at that point. And one of the ways that you can resolve this, and again, it also depends on, you know, what's going on around you in your environment, and how the tear appeared in the first place. But usually, when we want to close it back up, say you're dealing with it reopening many times, and so you're kind of losing sleep on that, is to do some sort of spiritual bath, use a sort of spiritual cologne that's formulated for healing it. So, using that could be using herbs such as anamu, that can be using herbs like uh, balm of Gilead, making some sort of concoction in that sense that you can just kind of either spray down, or sit in a bath to kind of let it repair and heal it. And doing that either over a course of a couple of days. Divination will kind of tell you how long, or just kind of doing it every day for maybe even 3 days at the most, and then seeing how, if it's resolved itself in that time. So, our third way that we see this also occurring too is that it also will impact your vital energy. So, the aura contains our vital energy. Our vital energy is what we use to kind of, it essentially is all the energy your body needs, especially for your organs, your meridians, all of these things that are kind of working off of that energy. And when the integrity of our aura has been compromised, uh, we kind of it our vital energy begins to seep out of these tears and these holes. Or if you're dealing with, say, a psychic vampire, someone who's very kind of narcissistic or abusive towards you, and like you get a lot of you get drained by them very easily, you begin to start to feel really run down, like you just really don't have the energy to do things. Another way this might appear is, a lot of times people will think that they are empaths, and I don't mean just someone who's really really empathetic, but they may feel what other people are feeling very viscerally, as if they're feeling it as themselves. And this can sometimes lead to them believing that they're uh, experiencing the psychic phenomena of an empath. But what's really happening is that, either through poor boundaries, um, and just an aura that has been kind of is in a constant state of being open, and so that vital energy is always seeping out. When it's seeping out, things can seep in very easily. So it's almost like being a kindergarten teacher and wearing an all white outfit. By the end of the day, you have all sorts of stains and dirt on you, and it can, in a sense, feel like your own, and you can kind of almost, you feel everything so intensely, and it can become very hard to separate what's going on there. And the other impact of the vital energy kind of seeping out as well is that, If you are someone who's healing from a particular injury or a surgery, or you deal with certain physical ailments, chronic conditions especially, it will begin to exacerbate those things. It can be harder to heal from them. Or say if it's something like, sometimes your knee hurts once in a while. Sometimes it could be that there is a tear that's right above that area, and it can be hard for your body to heal itself because the vital energy in that area is constantly seeping out. Now, the next area in which our aura has a direct effect on us is also our mental health. A lot of times, as well, with one, because of the way that the aura contains our energy, sometimes even within there, if we're not grounded, a lot of times people who are very um, imaginative, very creative, especially if they daydream a lot of the times that's because their vital energy is kind of just sitting near the crown and third eye area, and they're not being grounded. And when our especially with someone who has a lot of nervous energy, they can tell when something is off with it, or because the not only does the intuition, like I mentioned earlier, become very hard to rely on, it can then also begin to exacerbate if, anxiety, depression, it can really begin to wreak havoc on those areas as well, because there are several different layers of the aura, and one of those is the mental and the emotional layers as well. And if you are someone who's not taking care of your aura by way of cleansing on a somewhat regular basis, and again, this depends on your environment. If you know that you live a somewhat hectic, stressful life, or you are going in areas where the energy around there is unhealthy for you, and that begins to kind of wear down on your aura, especially like I mentioned before with the tears, where you can begin to feel other people's energy. You're kind of taking on all of that as your own, and it can begin to kind of wear down on your mental faculties. And you'll begin to see that depending on where you naturally have, an affinity for being affected in certain sort of mental either mental illnesses, mental conditions, things of that nature. So you really want to, and also it can kind of cloud your mind. The more clouded it becomes, it's like having impurities kind of uh, in the aura. You are being affected by these things, and even as I talked about how it affects your vital energy, another thing you also have to think about is especially when there are these tears in the aura, that means you're also susceptible to certain types of parasitic spirits, spiritual intrusions happening into your aura. So especially for the person that is living uh, whose lifestyle involves, or maybe family that they live with who are antagonistic, or a job that is like kind of soul sucking, whatever it is, it there is a type of spiritual spirits can enter the aura through these tears very easily, very easily. They don't have to necessarily like attack you in order to kind of make their way into it. So what begins to happen too is that certain types of parasites have a certain way that they like to feed. So whether that's provoking you to start a fight with someone else and feasting on that, or just feasting on your vital energy so you just feel drained all the time. So you really want to keep in check not only cleansing your aura on a regular basis, but also protecting it. So whether that is by way of suffumigation, like certain incenses and kind of steams, um, spiritual colognes, amulets. So not only do you want to make sure that you are keeping your aura clean, and also this will promote the health of your promote your mental health, your own spiritual well-being, but also you just want to protect it against anything that could intrude upon it. And the more that you begin to maintain it, the more sensitive you can actually become to when something is just like off, when something is just absolutely off. The final way that, and final reason why we want to maintain the health of our aura is, and I kind of already began to allude to this, was your physical health, right? So certain illnesses, not all, but certain illnesses can begin from, they'll start energetically from your aura right outside of it. And the longer that it's kind of been able to kind of sit there, it'll begin to kind of trickle down into the aura until it begins to manifest in the physical body and causing issues there. And it really depends on, say, this is kind of also how, when they talk about the evil eye and how it can negatively impact you physically, and a lot of times what's happening is that that negative energy, that dense energy, is making its way through your auric field. And as it makes its way down through the layers of it, maybe you begin to feel that emotionally, mentally, certain thoughts, thinking of that person or thinking negatively. Then it will, if given enough time, and again, this depends on the person. So it'll essentially a lot of times hit you where you are already kind of weak, and then it'll kind of makes its way into the physical body, and then beginning to manifest as physical symptoms. Sometimes, again, like especially with nausea, you can easily feel that's why a lot, I think, I believe personally, why a lot of illnesses such as like colds and flus, like why a lot of times nausea is one of the first things that you get, because once the aura especially begins to flow in the opposite direction, it also means the stomach meridian is also flowing in the opposite direction a lot of times, and that's when you get that intense nausea feel, or maybe even walking into a space that maybe has negative or low vibratory sort of spirits, and you might feel this psychically as and might feel like a physical sensation of nausea. So it's very kind of sensitive in that sense to a lot of things. And again, it depends on the types of spiritual gifts you have as well, how you might sense such a thing. But you really want to kind of stay on top of it, because the way that I've seen, especially with, say, with terminal illnesses, a lot of the times it's because, or not because, but what will happen, the first kind of signs of which someone is dealing with a terminal illness, is that the aura can no longer close up. And even despite spiritual intervention, this is not including, a miracle happening, but uh, even with spiritual medicines, you'll still see that it keeps reopening and reopening and reopening and reopening. And uh, because it cannot reopen, the vital force, the vital energy of that person continues to seep out. And the less vital energy essence you have, the less your body has to work with. It's almost thinking of it as like a fuel for your body to operate and to move. So I've been talking for a bit. I'm gonna, I guess, invite everyone on stage if you guys want to say anything, add anything to the conversation, or ask a question. Please feel free to. Did anyone have any questions, any comments?
I'm just enjoying listening to you teach.
Oh, thank you, Berwin. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Um, so like when it comes to like the daily practice of protecting your aura,
Mm-hmm.
what is like the like I guess most like time effective
Oh,
way to
yeah, yeah.
maintain it?
Like I say, I'm not lazy, I am efficient. So if I can find the easiest way that's going to work, keyword work, that's why I like spiritual colognes the most. So I personally, I'll use Archangel Michael cologne that I at least formulate, or you can get one and augment it with whatever herbs you like. I spray that on. I also You can also use spiritual oils. It's a lot of this stuff is especially if you're into spiritual things. A lot of You've seen a lot of people implement. So whether that's a protective mojo bag, um, having something that you've already made, if you have something like that already, begin to implement that. Um, One of the simplest ones that I've ever taught other people to do who do not practice, spiritual work, was to visualize. And especially, I know that we have a lot of praying people in this room. So, one of the things I'll say is that I'm putting on the armor of God, the armor of light, to cast off the works of darkness. And I will imagine that, or visualize, excuse me, I will visualize that there is a bright white light that's coming and emanating from God that is protecting my energy. And I will kind of augment that how I will. So I'll imagine that there are a reflective quality to it, that it is as strong as and as dense as a diamond. Um, And when you begin to kind of practice that daily, and this is just visualizing it, right? And doesn't necessarily require you to have a cologne ready or an oil ready, but just even doing that on a daily basis, not only will you be able to actually energetically feel it come on, but you'll also it'll be so much quicker. So as soon as you think about it, it's almost as if you just all you did was hit a button and now it's active. So practicing that, and I personally, even if you don't work with God, if there's another spirit or a deity that you work with, I think that might be the best approach, is kind of partnering with them in that. And so like I said, I will imagine that the light itself is emanating from God, um, so that it's not just, I'm not doing it within my own power, but there's a supernatural backing to it. Does that answer your question, Brandy?
Yes, that was incredibly clear. Thank you so much. I like how you gave an example where we can use a supply, and then another example where we can just use ourselves, like
Hmm.
in terms of that white light. So that way we can kind of like stop wherever we are. Because I think like going into like a crisis situation,
Hmm.
we're not like thinking straight, like when it comes, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
when your aura is off, it may be kind of hard to be like, okay, let me go grab this tool. And
Yeah.
so
Especially if you
I
don't
know
have it on
sometimes I get
hand.
that way. Yeah, sometimes I get I get that way where I'm like, "Ooh, wait, let me just start with the simple like prayer and stuff." So that was really good. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm Tava. I'm gonna get to you in just a minute, but I also wanted to add, if especially if you have children, that's a very really easy one for them to implement as well. And doing it even before bed. Sometimes I'll do that. If say, especially if you know maybe it's been a minute before you've spiritually cleansed the house and protected it. Doing it at night as well can be really helpful in terms of ensuring that certain types of spirits don't bother you at night. I am Tavon. Did you have a question? I know your hand was raised earlier.
Good greetings. I'm just loving the conversation, but I was actually sitting here listening, and I was getting downloads.
Mm,
And one of the things I was hearing, is that as we evolve and as we grow spiritually, and we go and I think everybody here pretty much is a healer,
mhm,
or a teacher or a leader. That we traverse different realms, and there is help for us.
mhm,
There's assistance and guidance for us in each realm. And I heard very strongly that a lot of us needs to call on our ancestors more, only not in the sense of over worship or
Mhm.
a sense of lowering our own godship, but in the sense of working with their energies to protect us as we do navigate our spiritual work. So that's just something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because, um, again, you don't want to be doing everything just, through your own power, especially when you already have a bunch of stuff going on all the time. And that can be also just our ancestors do have a great investment in us already to see us do well. And one of the ways that we can, be in partnership and work with them is to, ask for that protection, especially if you are maybe your skill level isn't to a particular level that can fight off certain things, right? And why should you have to fight off every single thing that comes towards us? Even the earth has the moon to protect it from the an onslaught of meteorites and asteroids. So why not have that extra layer? And then also, it makes me think of, we have this great cloud of witnesses that we were given, and partnering with them, and like you mentioned, not necessarily in worship, but we are in our relationship with them by venerating and honoring them. They honor us as well by helping to protect us, protect our children, um, protect our loved ones, those we care about, those who we are guarding over. So it's I think essentially, I think that's a great point that you brought up, because we do want to be in partnership. We're not alone, even if we may feel alone. We're not alone, um, and that could be a great way, of working with them. And actually, that's something I just thought of was maybe even asking them to give you ideas and inspire you, like perhaps. So one way that I've talked about this, not on here, not on this particular platform, but I've talked about, and I learned this from, if you don't know her, she's a magician. Her name is Josephine McCarthy. And she does this thing that I think is just pretty clever. And because you can augment your aura, so even when we're using spiritual colognes and using mojo bags and stuff like that, that energy is permeating and mixing into our own aura to kind of augment it, amend it, right? um, and you can do this even using your visual uh skill set, right? Visualizing. And if you're not good at visualizing, even if you just pretend that you know that it's doing this thing, you don't have to necessarily see it in your mind if that is not something you're able to really do. But imagining that you have this mask on, right? And this was in particular, she brought this up in terms of someone she was friends with at the time who was a like a psychic vampire, an energy vampire. And so what she did was they're sitting together and she imagines that she's wearing this like really scary mask, like a big one that like, it's like her aura has taken the shape of this thing. She's visualizing this thing. And as they're talking, this woman begins to kind of shift in her seat. She's getting uncomfortable. And then eventually she picks a fight with her and leaves. And I thought this was great because, in that sense, it's kind of the same line of thinking of, if you have ever encountered someone and you just knew their energy was off, but a lot of times when you know that their energy is off, sometimes it's because of whatever spirits are, already, whatever parasitic sort of spirits that are attached to them, that's you might be sensing that too. But it's sort of the same kind of idea, but instead of, by way of some sort of parasitic thing or because there's something off with you, that if you are making and visualizing your aura to look more intimidating, so when you're encountering certain types of people, um, so that you don't you don't seem as such an easy like or available yummy snack for them energetically. So I've employed that before of just like I will imagine that my almost like my spiritual body is way bigger than it actually is and more menacing. And whether that's I add like a bunch of horns and teeth and like weird eyes, whatever. Um, that's also another thing that you can implement. And something I began to experiment with because of that idea was having visualizing my aura to. So I've mentioned the sort of protective white light, right? Another thing I've experimented with, and I just kind of picked this color because one, it is close to the color of my aura, which is a violet color. And I'll imagine that my when I want to cleanse it, and I'm not talking, this is not to replace a really good spiritual bath, right? Um, but on a kind of daily basis, just as maintenance, I will imagine that my aura has turned into purple flames, violet flames. And these flames are burning away any sort of psychic dirt, um, any sort of like heavy thought forms that you may have picked up. Also, that they burn away any etheric cords that no longer are healthy for me to have. And the more you practice this every day, the more you'll begin to kind of feel like, ooh, okay, I feel a little, just a little bit lighter. And again, it's not to necessarily replace it, but so I'll start with I pretend that the flames start and they're very close to my body, very, very close to my etheric body. And then I imagine they expand outwards as far out as I can imagine that it goes. And it's just cleansing. It's not, it consumes anything that shouldn't be there and that is harmful to me. And so that might be something that might be useful to anyone here to try as well. And I would go with any kind of color that you feel an affinity to, or whatever one pops into your mind. To okay, I think this would work well for me. But implementing, I like to use that before I have that protective layer put on. Um, and actually, if you guys are in, I'm going to talk about it. If you're here, you're here. Was Another aspect of this is uh, cord cutting, right? When I first got into, I guess even like new age stuff, and not necessarily down the occult rabbit hole yet, but I remember hearing about cord cutting, being very interested in cutting cords. And if you're not familiar with that, if anyone who's listening is not familiar with that, the idea with an etheric cord or is that there are these different cords that connect us to different people, even to people that we love. They can also connect us to traumatic events that have happened in our lives or even happy ones. Um, and people will usually employ cutting of a cord when it's say to a toxic ex-lover, or you can't, or it's a lover that you can't get over but you need to move on, or a toxic friend, whatever it is, and you're cutting that thing so that you can move on forward from it. And I remember that so when I see them, a healthy one, what I see is a nice kind of, almost like it's made out of light, and it's like silvery almost, and it's like this little beautiful cord, whatever. Um, and that's a nice healthy one. But when I would see cores that were needed to be removed, they look disgusting. They look like really grosser umbilical cords. Like they just look nasty. And I had this one that no matter how many times I tried to cut it, I could not cut it. And so I remember kind of being on YouTube and like trying to find like any sort of information. I found this one woman and I really wish that I could remember her name or the name of her channel, because this is where I got the idea from and I'd love to credit her. But if you ever find a woman, brunette, speaking about pulling cords, this is where I got it from. And she was talking about how she preferred to pull them as opposed to cutting them, because sometimes when you cut them, there's a chance, not always, but that there's a chance that it might regrow. And I was like, oh, let me try that. So I the first thing I did was to kind of quickly smudge the room I was in, called for my spirit guides and all that good stuff, and to help guide me in the process. and I began to pull this thing out, and as I pulled it out, it was like it I thought at first maybe I was doing it wrong because I was like, "This thing seems like it's really long." I'm pulling and then there's still more, and I could almost sense it, like, going so far down into my body, down to the tips of my toes, and then I began to see these different hooks in them, and I was like, "Okay, that's interesting. I don't really know what that means." But I kept going until, I found the end of it. And that one did not regrow, and so I was happy with that. Mind you, if you do it this way, you will need something to like a healing spiritual bath or healing cologne to heal the aura because it will leave a hole in that area. So that's usually what I will employ, and what I've found in doing this is that when there's a particularly toxic relationship we have with someone, and it could be a toxic parent, it could be, and they don't necessarily have to be energy vampires for the relationship that you're in with them to be parasitic in that sense. And when it's like that, when you are getting drained by that person, I've always found that those cords always have hooks in them. Kind of like that expression when you talk about, having your hooks in somebody. It's like that. There'll be these different hooks, and sometimes they might be connected to a certain like mysterious like pain that you might have in your body. I had a client who she had she didn't even tell me that she had a pain there, but I was like, I was doing the pulling the cord for you, and I was like, "Do you have pain in that area?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I began to also sense about that cord that it was connected to her mother, who she has a kind of contemptuous relationship with. And so that told me a lot in terms of, okay, a lot of the times when we have these sort of draining relationships, toxic relationships with people, and it could be also a situation, right? It could be a event that happened that is mentally and emotionally draining, but it just like kind of it's almost like it's just feeding off of you, and not only feeding off of you, but this is just what I think, this is what I believe is happening also is not only that it's feeding off of you, but it is kind of inputting information. It's almost like a feedback loop, like almost like you're just getting a bit of poison back as it begins to suck more life out of you and drain you, remind you of that painful thing. And when we do cord cuttings, and again, people will either do cord cuttings or I prefer, especially if there are hooks involved, to just pull the thing out, pull it out by the root so that it just doesn't like begin to regrow. Like if you think of it, there's some certain types of plants, right? Where the roots, if you don't get every last bit of root, if you leave even the tiniest bit, that root will reroot itself and the plant will regrow. So, with these types of situations, I prefer to just pull that thing out. And once it's been pulled out, to heal the aura, heal the area, I'll give Reiki to that area as well. So even if you're implementing whatever type of healing modality that you're a part of, and just beginning to heal that area. But I find that it's not only just with other people, but it can be other events. And slowly, what I've also been beginning to um, find as well is that certain types of illnesses, not all, but certain types also have that sort of cord connected to them. And I believe that a lot of these are the ones, especially that kind of, as I talked about before when we were talking about the 5 reasons to maintain the health of your aura, was that certain illnesses will start in the auric field, and then thus making themselves way down into the physical body when they begin to manifest. Um, and I believe certain of those as well will have a bit of a cord, a part of them. And once you pull them out, you still have to kind of remain with the healing from the actual physical effects of what has already happened. But the momentum of it being fed will cease, if that makes sense. Does anyone else have any comments, anything to add, or any questions for me?
There's some in the chat there.
Is there? I can't even see Where's the chat?
Yeah, Latasha asked the question, can that happen also when you sleep with someone?
Oh, yeah. Well, any connection that we have with somebody, there's going to be some sort of a chord, right? Some chords will, like when you drift apart from somebody and you grow apart, that chord will just kind of wither and die all by itself. But I've always thought of it as we're all interconnected in some way, right? And anyone you come into contact with, especially even sexually, there will be some sort of cord there. Whether that cord is healthy or not really depends on the connection that you in the relationship that you have with that person. So even if you sleep with them once and then you never see them again, it might just wither out and peter out and eventually fall out, whatever. Um, the way that I have seen it is like they almost look like they become very small and withered and like I almost imagine it like it's like little twigs. They just kind of break apart easily when they're kind of done and atrophying out of the spiritual body. But yeah, you can definitely there'll be some sort of cord. It just depends on the health of that relationship that you have with the person.
That totally makes sense because studies have shown that actually when we sleep with people, like our DNA, we're exchanging DNA. So you have the
Hmm.
DNA of someone else inside of you, no matter what your sex. So that totally makes sense that the aura would be there.
Hmm.
Um, but Latasha was saying, so if the person is hanging around, it can still feed off of you.
Well, that depends. That depends on the again the type of relationship you have with. If the person is like really narcissistic and they are like literally mentally and emotionally draining to you, then the type of cord that's connecting the two of you is going to be parasitic. Whether they are doing it intentionally or not doing it intentionally, just the nature of the relationship is like that. Um, and I think also, and it doesn't always, in terms of being able to move on from the person, necessarily always have to have a core. I mean, you could, and I think this sometimes too, that if you are kind of almost obsessing over somebody, that you have the one who has the hooks inside of them, and the more you're obsessing, the more you're just kind of eating up just a little bit of them each time. But yeah, it just depends on the nature of it. If they just are completely draining to you mentally and emotionally, then yeah, I would say that it is. Um, I would say that it was a sort of parasitic in that sense. And again, this is also why when I kind of described before I go to pull them out, that I'll talk to my spirits first. I'll set the stage for everything because even if you have a cord that say isn't healthy, uh, it may not necessarily mean that it needs to be pulled out. Perhaps the actual relationship that you have with the person needs to be healed. Maybe it's that you have resentments or whatever it is that's going on and you never talked about it. Well, how can the relationship actually heal itself and be better and be a healthier connection if, things aren't being dealt with? So, not all unhealthy etheric cords need to be removed. But that's why I just ask my spirits first and then kind of proceed from there. Um, I hope that answers the question. Anyone else have any comments, any questions? Love to hear from you all.
Oh yeah, she was saying that because this is a good um like because you're talking about the 5 ways to maintain your aura. So
Hmm.
she was saying like she's finding so they're around the environment, but then it triggers unhealed situation. So I'm guessing that
Mm,
would just be another reason why we would want to maintain, right?
yeah, why you want to have your protection up. And not just one type of protection, just layer that stuff on. So whether you're starting with, like I said, even just the visualizing of the light and using an incantation, using clones, using oils, um, layering your protection. If it's like say like for an example, someone you work with and you can't leave the job, um having or if it's more than one person, say it's a group of people, having that protection there. Obviously, you can do other work to get rid of those people, but um, you want to be able to have boundaries. That's why I was talking about people who think they are psychically empathetic and not just on a personal level an empathetic person, is because a lot of times when I've seen with, especially with clients, is those who have got like their aura looks like Swiss cheese. They usually think that they're empathic because it's just everyone's emotions and thoughts are just kind of seeping right through into their aura, and so they're feeling it psychically very instantly, and they're just holding on to other people's shit because there's never made clear boundaries for the other people's um, behaviors or how what they allow into their space. And if you are allowing people to kind of run all over you, talk any way, sort of way to you, because again, you can get tears in your aura just from having an argument with a person, a particularly charged one. That can be detrimental to you, right? But if you are kind of not maintaining the health of it by cleansing it, by healing it, and by protecting it, you're going to have a lot of different issues that crop up on a spiritual level, and just being in that space with people like that, you have to have strong boundaries. That's part of, and boundaries for yourself of what is allowable for to come into my space. And if I cannot control that the person I have to be around them, what can I control? I hope that was helpful, Natasha. Let me see if I can figure out how to see the chat, y'all. I am not the most savvy on here, but. And another reason I also wanted to add about the empathic thing was because I remember at one point really thinking I was like an empath, and until the moment when I was pregnant and everything, all my psychic gifts were super like on, and I was on a vacation with my husband, and we're just at the at this corner store. I'm standing there and I'm like, man, I am just craving a cigarette, and I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't like cigarettes. I don't like the smell of them. There should be no reason why I am craving one. And I looked over at him and I was like, are you craving a cigarette? And he's like, yeah, because you know how like when you're at the register behind the person is usually like where all the cigarettes are. And so he was staring at them. And I was like, oh, that's like a empath on a psychic level, not on a emotional like personality trait level. Like I think I'm an empathetic person, right? But that was one of the only times I really felt it in a very clear way, was in that heightened state of being pregnant. But other than that, usually with people, when if I keep seeing, and it doesn't mean that if your boundaries are really bad that you by virtue are not an empath. You still could be. It's just that if you find that once you resolve the issues with the integrity of your aura being kind of abused and unhealthy, and you've resolved those things on a consistent level, and then you suddenly notice that you don't get those empathic, psychic insights, it's probably because you just weren't one to begin with. But I mean, I think you can also develop that particular skill if you really wanted to work at it. But anyways, let's see, how long have 49 minutes. Does anyone else have any other questions for me? I think after this I'm gonna wrap it up. Or any comments?
This is so good. Do you are you currently doing any like aura repairing, and what is that like
Oh,
process like if someone else is like repairing your aura?
yeah. So, when I do, so am still open for like healing sessions. If you go through the link that I have pinned up on here, you can book a session with me. And usually with that, the first thing that I do when I'm doing a healing session, and by healing session, I mean I use Reiki, I also use prayer, and I use certain spiritual medicines. And all those things come together to form the type of healing sessions that I do. And one of the first things that I check for is your aura, because another key thing here is that if you have tears in your aura and I start to like put my hands and start channeling energy into you, all of that is going to seep right back out through your aura. So the first things that I address are checking the aura and doing maintenance on it. And then after the session, I tend to check that person if they had any tears for the next 2 days to ensure that it doesn't just reopen on its own, because it sometimes happens. Um, but just to ensure that it is closed, and if it does reopen, that I okay, well, invite you on stage, Anthony. Repair that, and then I go through the regular session. Anthony, did you have a question?
Concerning the question that Brandy asked,
Mhm.
so is your work mostly in person or you do remote work as well?
So I actually do almost exclusively remote work at this
Okay.
point in time. So the way that I work is that I will call if I've never talked to the person ever, like I don't really know them, um, or if I've maybe only talked to them, I'll usually have them. I'll want their name, where they live, currently. I don't need like their full address, but the town, an
Hmm.
area, a photograph is usually very helpful. I'm very visual anyway, so and then I'll call that person into a prop. And the prop I use is just it's like, honestly, mine is just an old uh like stuffed animal toy that's kind of in the shape of a human that
Uh-huh.
my son had when he was 2, and he doesn't use it. So I use that. I cleanse it before I work on the person, just so there isn't any interference there. But I call the person into that prop, and having all that in, it's kind of like if you're doing, making a mojo bag for somebody and you need that sort of information. I gather that, and I using particular types of Reiki symbols, they're kind of placed into the prop, and then I begin to work on them as if they were right there with me in person.
Okay, understood. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. And also through the link, you can also find, I also am open for divination as well, if you ever want to do a session with some tarot with me. And I also have a couple of 2 journals that I designed myself and created. I have the Dreamer of Dreams journal that is up on Amazon that you can get through the link on there, as well as a manifestation um, journal that I also created as well. They're both guided uh, journals that for you to use, and I have a bunch of other stuff on there as well. But yeah, if no one else has any other questions or comments, I will bring this to a close. But I'll just ask one more time: does anyone else have anything that they'd like to say or ask? All right, so I'm gonna try to do some more of these talks, these rooms in the future. So just keep an eye out. Follow me if you are not already. You can also follow me on Instagram, and it is at Light and Shadow Healer. So you can find me there as well. And yes, thank you so much for listening in.